I'll never forget that day. It was the last day of fourth grade and everything felt normal, almost magical. The school was buzzing with energy, with kids running through the halls, excited to kick off their summer break. For me, it was a special day, not just because it marked the end of another school year, but because I was heading to Dennis's house, my best friend. The thought of spending the afternoon with him, playing video games and exploring his huge backyard, felt like the perfect way to start the holidays. Dennis had always been like a brother to me. We did everything together, and I trusted him more than anyone else. I remember his mom had promised to pick us up that afternoon. Back then, parents were strict about picking up their kids. No one went home alone, especially at our age, but something about that school departure felt different. There was an odd sensation I couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was the gloomy sky or the fact that some kids seemed to be leaving in a rush. As I waited by the gate, I watched the other parents arrive. The sound of cars pulling up and hurried voices was normal, but that afternoon, everything felt off. The air was heavier, like time was slowing down. I didn't see Dennis's mom anywhere. The clock seemed to move slower, and with each passing minute, my anxiety grew. When I finally heard Dennis calling me, I felt a wave of relief. He came toward me with his usual smile, saying his mom was waiting just around the corner. Without thinking twice, I grabbed my backpack and went with him. But if I had known what was about to happen, I never would have taken that first step out of the gate. Everything seemed normal once we left the school. Dennis and I talked about the plans for the afternoon, laughing as we imagined the new game he'd bought. The street was almost empty, which wasn't unusual for that hour. Most parents preferred to pick their kids up directly at the gate, so we usually left quickly. But as we walked toward the corner where his mom was supposedly waiting, something felt off. Dennis seemed more restless than usual, glancing around frequently as if checking something. I tried to brush it off, thinking it was just his usual nerves, but my instincts told me something was wrong. When we finally turned the corner, there was no car, no sign of his mom, no sign that things were as they should be. "She probably had to grab something quickly and will be back soon," he said, smiling, though it didn't seem as genuine as usual. That made me uneasy. I suggested we go back to the school and wait at the gate, but he insisted we didn't need to, saying his mom never delayed much. That's when I started to notice something truly strange. He was holding my arm a bit too tightly, almost as if he was trying to prevent me from leaving. The atmosphere shifted. The sky, which had been just cloudy, now felt heavy, as if a storm was about to break. A cold breeze passed, sending chills down my spine. Dennis urged me to keep walking, saying his mom might have parked a bit farther. Reluctantly, I followed his lead, but with every step the sense of danger grew stronger. And then it happened. Up ahead, I saw an old car parked by the side of the road. It wasn't his mom's car. It was large and gray, with darkened windows that kept us from seeing inside. Dennis quickened his pace, then stopped and looked at me with a strange expression, one I'd never seen before. His eyes, which usually carried warmth and trust, now felt foreign. It was as if he'd become someone else. Before I could say anything, he muttered, "Trust me, it'll be quick." I froze. What was happening? Why did he seem so different? My heart pounded, and in that moment I knew something was very wrong. I was about to step into a situation that would change my life forever. I couldn't breathe. There I was, standing in the middle of that desolate street with Dennis beside me, urging me toward the gray car. Everything in me screamed to run, but I couldn't comprehend what was happening. Why was my best friend acting this way? Why was he so determined to take me there? As he grabbed my arm again, I made a desperate effort to pull away. "Dennis, what's going on? That's not your mom's car. Why are you taking me there?" His gaze was intense, and what I saw in his eyes sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't Dennis as I knew him. There was something dark, as if he were fighting with himself. "Just come with me, man. Trust me, it'll be quick, I swear," he said, his voice shaky. That's when I realized he was scared too. Something, or someone, was forcing him, and now I was part of it, even though I didn't understand why. I made a choice. I took a step back, creating distance between us. "If you don't explain what's happening right now, I'm going back to the school and calling for help," I said, my voice trembling despite my attempt to sound firm. Dennis froze for a moment, then took a step toward me, desperation written all over his face. "You don't get it. They're watching me. If we don't go, it's gonna get worse, much worse. Please, just trust me this time," he pleaded, pointing toward the car. My hands were sweating, and my breath came faster. Who were they? Why was Dennis so terrified? That's when the window of the gray car began to lower. Inside, a man in a dark suit sat, his cold, piercing gaze fixed on us. He didn't say a word, just watched, as if waiting. Time seemed to stop. I knew I had to make a choice. Trust Dennis and get into that car, or run as fast as I could, never looking back. My entire body was tense, caught between fear and doubt. And then I realized that no matter what I chose, nothing would ever be the same again. I couldn't breathe. After everything that had happened, there I stood, facing that man in the gray car. His eyes seemed to pierce through my soul, cold and calculating. Dennis stood beside me, silent, as if he had lost his voice. The car's engine hummed quietly, adding to the eerie atmosphere that made my head spin even more. "Get in the car," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. I wanted to run, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. I looked at Dennis, hoping he'd say something, give me an explanation, but he just lowered his gaze, avoiding mine. "Why? Who are you? What's going on here?" My voice trembled as I struggled to form the questions. The man chuckled softly, almost as if savoring my distress. "You don't get to ask the questions," he replied, leaning slightly toward us. "Now, get in the car, or things will get much worse. For both of you." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I looked at Dennis again, trying to understand what he had done, what he had gotten me into. But instead of anger, all I felt was fear. Fear of what this man might do. Fear of not getting out of there. My mind raced, trying to find an escape. But the man continued to watch, his patience running thin. "I don't have all night," he said, his tone sending a chill through me. Heart pounding, I stepped backward. "I'm not going anywhere with you," I declared, my voice wavering but firm. The man let out a low laugh, his smile disappearing as he opened the car door and stepped out, tall and imposing. He took a step toward me, and in that moment I knew I had made the worst decision of my life. Before I could react, I felt a heavy hand grip my arm. Everything happened so quickly it felt like a blur. Dennis screamed something, but I couldn't make out what he said. And then, everything went dark. When I woke, everything felt like a hazy dream. My head throbbed, and my vision struggled to focus on the dim surroundings. I was in a poorly lit room with concrete walls and a metallic smell that made my stomach churn. The flickering lights cast strange shadows across the space. That's when I realized I was tied to a chair, my limbs bound tightly with straps that didn't seem to have an easy escape. In front of me, the man from the gray car stood, now closer than I ever wanted him to be. His unsettling smile returned, but this time there was something more. Triumph, as if he knew something I didn't. "Finally awake," he said, his voice echoing through the room. "I hope you've rested well. We'll need your full attention for what's coming next." My mind raced, trying to grasp what he meant. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice shaky, filled with fear and confusion. "Why am I here? What does any of this mean?" He chuckled softly, almost amused by my panic. Curiosity, always so dangerous. But beware, it could be someone's undoing." He stepped closer, leaning in until our eyes were level. "You still don't understand, do you? This isn't about Dennis or even about you. It's about what you represent." I furrowed my brow, still lost. "What do you mean, what I represent? What is this?" He crossed his arms, his smile never leaving his face. "You're the missing piece. The detail that made all of this come together. You have something they want, and they'll stop at nothing to take it." Fear gripped me, stronger than ever. What was he talking about? What did I have that someone wanted? My mind struggled to comprehend, but the man's next words chilled me to the core. "It's already begun. You'll see the truth soon enough." It was the last day of our senior year, and the school felt eerie that day. The weather didn't help. Thick, dark clouds blanketed the sky, and rain had been falling relentlessly since early morning. Many students had decided to skip school or left early after lunch. In the end, it was just me and a small group of friends, those who always stayed until the very last second, ready for any kind of adventure, even on a day as gloomy as this. Our original plan had been simple: spend the last day of school at the beach, celebrating the end of an important chapter of our lives. But with the weather like this, any idea of sand and sun was out of the question. That's when someone with a nervous smile and a mischievous glint in their eyes suggested an alternative: exploring the old, abandoned elementary school in the city. It was a place that had been the subject of rumors for years. Tales of hauntings, strange noises, and mysteries no one could explain. Still, we couldn't resist the allure of exploring it before demolition plans by the city went through, as we'd heard. The idea sounded ridiculously exciting at first, and with the torrential rain, we figured no one would be around to stop us. So, we decided to go. Our friend Eddie, the only one with a driver's license, took us there in his car. The school was hidden away in a remote neighborhood, surrounded by overgrown trees and bushes, as if nature was trying to reclaim it. The parking lot was nearly invisible beneath the vegetation, and the silence, only broken by the rain, seemed to watch us. My mind was at odds. On one hand, there was the excitement of doing something forbidden, of pushing boundaries. On the other, a growing fear I couldn't quite admit. The thought of entering a deserted building, especially one with such a long history of neglect, felt unsettling. But of course, no one wanted to be the first to back down. Eddie, always confident, grabbed a baseball bat from the trunk and smashed a window with a few swift hits. The sound of shattering glass echoed, blending with the sound of the rain. One by one, we climbed through the broken window, stepping into a world that seemed frozen in time. It felt as though the echoes of laughter and lessons long forgotten still lingered, but now everything was silent and unsettling. The adventure had begun, but deep down, I felt like entering that building was a mistake. As soon as we stepped inside the abandoned building, the silence took on a different feel. It wasn't just quiet. It was heavy, as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for our next move. The air was thick, with that familiar smell of dampness and decaying wood. My friends seemed excited, but I was on edge. Maybe it was the sound of the rain outside, or just the fact we were exploring a place filled with so much history. But an odd sensation gripped me. We walked down the main hallway, our footsteps echoing unnaturally. Every door we passed seemed to gape open, inviting something to swallow us. Some classrooms still had old furniture, broken desks, chairs stacked in dark corners, and chalkboards covered in dust. I tried to focus on the details, but a feeling of being watched never left me. It was as if invisible eyes were following us from the shadows. Then, the sound started. At first, I thought it was in my head, the faint, soft footsteps echoing behind us. It wasn't our footsteps on the creaky floorboards, it was something different, like someone was there, following us. I glanced back quickly, half expecting to find an animal or someone else who'd had the same idea to explore the school, but there was nothing, just darkness and my pounding heart. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice quieter and shakier than I intended. Lucas, one of my friends, chuckled and shook his head. "Relax, man. It's just the building creaking from the rain." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But there was something about those footsteps, their rhythm, their weight, that didn't seem right for an old, abandoned structure. We kept moving, but now I was restless. In every corner, every room, I half expected to see something. A shadow, a movement that would explain the noise I had heard. Then they came again, this time louder, closer. We stopped in unison, and I could see the fear in my friends' eyes. They had heard it too. "Come on, who's there?" Eddie shouted, gripping the baseball bat tightly. The silence that followed was oppressive, almost deafening. We stood there in the middle of the corridor, unsure of what to do. Each second dragged on like an eternity. I felt the cold creep up my spine as my eyes searched for any sign of movement. Then abruptly, a door at the end of the hall slammed shut, the sound reverberating through the empty building. We all jumped, the noise jolting us out of our daze. Lucas, usually the calmest of us, stepped back, murmuring, "I think we should leave." I couldn't agree more. Whatever was in that building, we weren't welcome, and something told me staying there any longer would be a mistake. With our hearts racing, we rushed down the hallway, shining our phone flashlights to guide us through the dark. The weak beams of light barely pushed back the darkness surrounding us. I felt the growing tension, as though we were being followed, watched at every step. The sound of the footsteps remained persistent, echoing from the empty corridors. We reached the end of the hall and found another door, nearly entirely dark. As we approached, something became visible, like someone was peeking from behind the door. Our flashlights illuminated the shape, revealing a humanoid figure standing still, watching us. I could feel my breath quicken as I stared at the dark figure. Its face remained hidden, but something about the way it stood, motionless, watching, filled me with dread. "Who's there?" Eddie asked, his voice trembling. No response, just the deafening silence, broken only by the rain outside and the sound of our breath. When the semester started at college, everything seemed normal. I was a freshman trying to adjust to the new routine, the unfamiliar city, and the overwhelming pressure of classes. My chemistry class was particularly tough, with long days filled with formulas, equations, and concepts that I could barely grasp. Our desks were arranged in groups of 4, and I always chose to sit in the middle of the room, on the left side near the back. The setting was typical. Students focused on notes and studying, but there was something off about Zach that became impossible to ignore. He sat right next to me, and from the start, his presence gave me a subtle discomfort. Zach was different from the others, and that difference unsettled me. He stood about 5'8", slightly overweight, with a scruffy, uneven beard that looked unkempt. But it wasn't his appearance that bothered me. It was the strange, detached vibe he emitted, like he was always out of sync with his surroundings, as if he were observing everything from a distance that no one else seemed to notice. There was something about him I couldn't quite put my finger on. Still, I needed his help, especially in chemistry, a subject I didn't understand at all. At first, Zach seemed like just someone who knew his way around chemistry. He noticed how lost I was and began helping me with my homework, clearing up my questions, and explaining the more complex formulas. In the beginning, he was supportive, and his assistance was a relief. But soon he started offering to complete assignments for me, even letting me copy his answers during tests. It felt strange, but desperate to pass, I accepted. There was nothing threatening about his actions, just a kind of help I'd never encountered before. Zach seemed quiet, reserved, and didn't give off any romantic signals or hints of ulterior motives, which felt like a relief at the time. His focus seemed solely on helping me achieve good grades. That's why I gave him my number when he asked. It didn't seem out of place. He didn't scare me, nor did he seem dangerous. In fact, he appeared to be someone genuinely trying to be helpful, someone who was knowledgeable about the subject. But then came the last day of class. What Zach did next caught me completely off guard. After all he'd done for me, I never imagined he'd make a move like that. He asked if I wanted to hang out with him after class. I was completely shocked. There had been no signs of interest before, and his question felt entirely out of place. I tried to be as polite as possible, yet honest, explaining that I didn't feel any attraction toward him, and that our personalities were just too different. I lied about going to Miami the following week, thinking it would be a gentle way to reject him without hurting his feelings. After all, he had been so helpful, and I didn't want this to become something awkward. His response was distant and cold, almost as if he had expected more from me. It left me uneasy, but I tried to move on and live my life as usual. After class, I went straight to my car and drove home. I thought that would be the end of it. I couldn't have imagined things getting worse. The next day, while hanging out with my friends, I received a message from Zach. He asked when I'd be going to Miami, as if he already knew I wasn't traveling. I was completely freaked out. How did he know that? I showed the message to my friends, and they were just as shocked as I was. I didn't know what to do. I tried responding casually, but it became clear he wasn't just checking the truth. He seemed to want more than that. The message left me unsettled, though I couldn't yet grasp how deep this was going. That night, more messages came in, filled with a threatening tone that made me regret brushing off his advances earlier. He wrote things like, "So you're just going to ignore me now that you don't need me anymore?" The fear was overwhelming. I panicked and told my parents and close friends everything. The feeling of being watched, not knowing where he was, left me incredibly uneasy. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see him, but there were no visible signs of his presence. Still, the sensation that he was near somehow was suffocating. In the middle of the night, after getting home exhausted, I took off my shoes at the door and heard knocking. It must have been around 1 a.m. I called out, asking who it was, and the response froze me. "It's me, Zach." My heart stopped. I screamed for him to leave or for my dad to come out and confront him, but he just kept knocking. My body trembled, my hands were sweaty, and waves of terror crashed over me. After that, I sent messages to everyone I knew, family, friends, even the police. I felt utterly helpless. Some advised me to go to the police, but the following day still seemed far away. When I finally hung up the phone and tried to sleep, I got another strange message. Once again, from Zach. It was long, filled with resentment and distorted language, as if he was trying to make it seem like I was the one to blame. He claimed he felt used, betrayed, and devastated by my lies and rejection. I shook from head to toe. I couldn't stop thinking about his dark words. Zach seemed fixated, as though his only purpose was to make me suffer. I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake, half expecting to hear more knocks at the door. When I finally drifted off, I knew this wasn't over.